Welcome back to Calm Coding, where we like to break down all the craziness that's been going on in the cybersecurity world.
Making sense of it all for everyone.
Exactly. And we've got a lot to unpack today, like always, I guess, right? But yeah, it's going to be an interesting one.
Definitely. Definitely.
Okay, so first up, this story kind of reminds us that the threat landscape is constantly shifting, right? Like, we used to think of Linux as this, like, ultra-secure operating system, right?
Yeah, like it was the go-to for anyone who is really serious about security.
Totally. And now it seems like the tables are turning. We're seeing this new Linux backdoor called autocolor, and it's hitting some pretty big targets.
Hmm.
Universities, government offices all over North America and Asia.
And what's really scary about it is how stealthy it is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, researchers at Unit 42 are calling it a very dangerous threat, and for good reason. It uses these really advanced obfuscation techniques, so it's super hard to even detect it, let alone actually get rid of it. Like, we're talking specialized software just to spot the thing.
Wow, so it's like a digital ghost, huh? Just slips in, does its thing, and vanishes without a trace.
Pretty much. And, once they're in, they can do pretty much anything they want.
I was going to ask about that. What can attackers actually do once they've got this backdoor in place?
Well, they have full remote access. So think of it like having a secret passage into a building. They can mess with files, execute commands, even use that infected machine to launch attacks on other targets.
Wow, okay, so it's like they've got the keys to the kingdom, and we don't even know how they got in.
Right. The initial infection vector is still a mystery.
Really?
Yeah, but researchers think it might involve tricking people into running files that seem totally harmless.
Interesting. What kind of files?
The names are really ordinary, like door, log, egg. It's pretty clever, actually, how they're hiding in plain sight.
It's a good reminder that we've got to be careful about what we download and run, even on systems that we think are secure. Speaking of security, though, this next story is actually some good news for once. It's about VPNs.
Oh yeah, this is a big win for VPN users. AMTSO, the Anti-Malware Testing Standards Organization, they finally released some standardized guidelines for VPN testing.
That's awesome. It feels like it's been a bit of a wild west out there with VPN providers making all these claims about privacy and security, but there hasn't really been a good way to verify if those claims were actually true, you know what I mean?
Exactly. But now, with these guidelines, they actually have to prove that their VPNs do what they say they do.
So no more hiding behind vague marketing promises.
Right. And the guidelines cover all sorts of important stuff, like they'll test to see if the VPN automatically connects when it should, how well the kill switch works to prevent data leaks if the connection drops, and if it actually blocks those sneaky DNS and IP leaks that could reveal your real location.
So no more loopholes, huh?
Nope. Plus, they also look at how the VPN performs under different network conditions because, nobody wants a slow VPN.
Yeah, for sure. It's a win-win for everyone. Users get more transparent and reliable VPN services, and providers can actually prove that their product is the real deal.
I know, finally some good news, right?
Okay, well, let's switch gears a little bit now and talk about a story that's maybe not so uplifting. This one involves a pretty massive campaign that's exploiting a vulnerability in a Microsoft-signed driver.
It's like a wolf in sheep's clothing, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Hiding in plain sight.
So the driver in question is called treesite.ses, version 2.0.2. It's an older driver, but here's the catch. It's signed by Microsoft, and that means it can slip past a lot of antivirus systems.
Wow. So even if we have our defenses up, we could still be vulnerable. Who are these attackers going after?
Primarily targets in China, but there have been reports in other parts of Asia too. And what's really interesting is how they're getting people to download this malicious driver. They're disguising it as deals on luxury goods, stuff people want.
Playing on our desires, classic tactic.
Right. And once that vulnerable driver is downloaded, it's basically game over. The malware can shut down security programs, giving the attackers full control of that computer. They can steal data, install more malware, all sorts of nasty stuff.
That's scary. Any idea who's behind this whole operation?
Researchers think it might be a group called Silver Fox. They're known for operating in that region, and they have a history of using similar tactics.
Well, that's not reassuring at all.
Yeah.
And speaking of things that aren't reassuring, this next story is sure to make any software developer sweat a little. It's about a campaign called GitVenom, and it's targeting developers through GitHub.
Oh yeah, GitHub. It's the heart of the open source community, but it's also become a pretty big target for these kinds of attacks.
So how does this GitVenom thing work?
Well, they're setting traps using hundreds of fake
Take
repositories.
repositories, huh?
Yeah, and they're not just random junk. They're actually designed to look like helpful tools or cracks for popular software. The kind of stuff developers are always looking for.
So it's like offering candy to a baby, basically.
Pretty much. And they're very meticulous about it, too. The attackers have put a lot of effort into creating detailed commits, documentation, README files. All of it's designed to fly under the radar.
Sounds pretty sophisticated.
Yeah, they're not messing around. And the malware they're spreading, it's a mix of all sorts of nasty stuff. Node.js stealers, Asyncrat, the Khazar backdoor, even clipboard hijackers that can grab sensitive information that you've copied.
Wow, so it's like a buffet of malware.
Exactly. And it's been going on for a while, too. Researchers think this campaign has been active for at least 2 years.
2 years, that's a long time.
It really shows how persistent these threats are, especially on open source platforms.
Makes you think twice about what you're downloading, right? Okay, so let's shift our focus over to Russia now. We've got a story that's a bit of a cyber thriller. Two major IT companies, Lanter and LAN ATM Service, both part of the Lanet group, got hit with a pretty serious cyber attack.
Yeah, and the Russian NCRCC, their cybersecurity agency, they're not taking it lightly. They issued a warning to all financial institutions telling them to change passwords and keys for any systems running in Lanet's data centers.
So it sounds like they think the attackers might have gotten their hands on some sensitive credentials.
That's definitely a concern. They're trying to contain the damage as quickly as possible.
And are there any other potential victims in this whole mess?
They're also advising any companies that give remote access to Lanet engineers to revoke those credentials and really tighten up their security.
It's like they're trying to stop a wildfire,
Yeah.
you know?
Ah,
But who actually started this fire?
Hmm.
And what are they after?
that's the million-dollar question. Nobody knows who the attackers are or what their motives might be, but what we do know is that Lanet has some pretty high-profile clients, including the Russian Ministry of Defense.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and other organizations within their military-industrial complex, so the stakes are pretty high here.
That's a little unsettling. Makes you wonder about the potential fallout from these kinds of attacks. Speaking of high-stakes attacks, our next story is about a massive botnet that's targeting Microsoft 365 accounts all over the globe.
And what's interesting about this one is that it's using a technique called password spraying.
Password spraying. Isn't that where they just try a bunch of common passwords against a ton of accounts?
Yeah, exactly. But in this case, they're taking it a step further. They're exploiting something called non-interactive sign-ins. That's usually used for, like, service-to-service authentication. But the thing is, these non-interactive sign-ins often bypass security alerts and even multi-factor authentication.
So it's like a backdoor into these accounts,
Yeah.
even with all the extra security measures in place.
Pretty much. A pretty clever way to circumvent the usual defenses.
Yikes. So who are these attackers going after?
It looks like their main targets are financial institutions and insurance companies.
Figures. Always got to go for the money.
Right, and researchers at Security Scorecard, they've uncovered some evidence that suggests the Chinese government might be involved in this whole operation.
So this could be state-sponsored cyber espionage.
It's certainly a possibility, which definitely adds another layer of complexity to this whole situation.
No kidding. Okay, well, before we get too lost in the world of international intrigue, let's talk about something a little closer to home. This next story is about a spy loan app that was disguised as a financial management tool called Finance Simplified. It was actually on Google Play for a while and got downloaded over 100,000 times, mostly by users in India.
And what's really sneaky about it is that it seemed to work just fine for people in other countries. But for users in India, there was a catch.
A catch? What kind of catch?
Well, the app would start by recommending loan applications, seeming helpful, but then it would redirect them to external websites where they were tricked into downloading a malicious loan app.
So it was like bait and switch.
Exactly. Once they downloaded that malicious app, that's when the real trouble started.
What were these malicious apps doing?
Oh, all sorts of nasty stuff. They would demand excessive permissions, charge insanely high interest rates, and even resort to harassment and threats to try and get money from the victims.
That's awful. It's like a digital loan shark taking advantage of people who are already in a tough spot.
Yeah. Sadly, that's a pretty accurate comparison. These predatory loan apps are a real problem, especially in developing countries.
It's a reminder that we have to be really careful about the apps we download, even from official app stores like Google Play. Always check the permissions, read the reviews, and if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And actually, speaking of things that might sound too good to be true, our next story involves Microsoft's AI assistant, Copilot. Researchers found out that Copilot can actually access thousands of private GitHub repositories, even ones that were public at one point but have since been made private.
Hold on, so even if you've locked down your repository, Copilot can still see what's inside.
It seems the Bing search engine, which Copilot uses, had cached those repositories when they were still public. And even though they're private now, Copilot can still access that cached data.
It's kind of creepy. It's like those embarrassing photos we thought we deleted years ago, but they're still lurking out there somewhere on the internet.
It's a good analogy. And it raises some serious questions about data security and how AI is accessing all this information, even if it's supposed to be private.
Absolutely. This kind of thing makes you really think twice about what you put online. Now, on a lighter note, remember the Black Basta ransomware gang?
Oh, yeah. What about them?
Well, it seems like they've sprung a leak, and I'm not talking about a data breach.
Oh, really?
Yeah, their internal chat logs, covering a whole year of conversations, got leaked on Telegram.
Wow. That's gotta hurt. Who did it? A disgruntled member. A rival gang.
The leak's been attributed to someone or some group calling themselves Exploit Whispers. Apparently, they were upset that Black Basta was targeting Russian banks, and they decided to take matters into their own hands.
So digital vigilantism, huh?
Kinda, yeah. It's a wild story.
Yeah.
And the leaked chat logs contain a ton of sensitive information. Stuff like their internal structure, key figures in the group, phishing templates they used, cryptocurrency addresses, victim credentials, all sorts of juicy details.
Wow, talk about a treasure trove for cybersecurity researchers and law enforcement. This leak could really disrupt their operations.
For sure. And it's a good reminder that even these super sophisticated criminal organizations aren't invincible. They can make mistakes, they can have internal conflicts, and they can get outsmarted.
And speaking of getting outsmarted, our last story for today is a bit of a reality check. It highlights just how huge the threat landscape really is.
What do you mean?
Well, research from NordVPN shows that the U.S. experienced over 1.9 billion malware incidents in 2024.
Billion with a B.
Billion with a B. It's a mind-boggling number, really.
And what are these attackers doing with all this malware?
A lot of it is phishing scams, using fake URLs that look like they're from big companies like Google or Facebook or Microsoft, and people fall for it, they give up their credentials, and boom, they're infected.
That's crazy. It's all about exploiting our trust in those brands.
Exactly. It just shows how important it is to stay vigilant. We can't just assume something is safe because it looks familiar.
So what you're saying is that we can't just rely on antivirus software. We have to be actively engaged in protecting ourselves online.
Absolutely. It's like staying healthy. It's not enough to just go to the doctor when you're sick. You have to make healthy choices every day.
Makes sense. So what are some of those healthy choices we can make to boost our digital immune system, so to speak?
Well, first of all, strong passwords and multi-factor authentication are an absolute must. They're your first line of defense against most attacks.
Okay, strong passwords, two-factor. Got it.
And then be really cautious about phishing scams. If an email seems too good to be true, it probably is. Don't click on any links, don't open any attachments, just delete it.
So if I get an email from a Nigerian prince offering me $1 million, I should just ignore it.
Probably a good idea, yeah. And be careful about downloading files from sources you don't trust. If you're not sure, scan it with your antivirus first.
Don't get advice. What about those software cracks and keygans you see all over the internet? Are those ever safe to use?
I would definitely stay away from those. They're often packed with malware. It's always better to buy your software from legitimate sources, even if it costs a little more. You're paying for peace of mind, basically.
No cutting corners when it comes to software. Got it. What about VPNs? Any tips on choosing one that actually does what it promises?
Remember those new VPN testing standards we talked about earlier? Those are a great resource. Look for providers who have gone through independent testing and have a good track record.
So do your research, basically. Don't just go for the cheapest option.
Exactly. And another important one, keep your operating system and software up to date. Those updates often include security patches that fix vulnerabilities attackers could exploit.
Like getting a flu shot for your computer, right? It's a little annoying, but it could save you from a lot of trouble later on.
Exactly. And finally, don't forget to back up your data regularly. If you ever get hit with ransomware or have a hard drive failure, a recent backup can be a lifesaver.
Like an insurance policy for your digital life.
Absolutely.
Great advice. So much to think about, right?
It can feel overwhelming sometimes, I know.
Yeah, but I think that's why shows like this are so important. It's about breaking down these complex topics and giving people the tools they need to stay safe in this crazy digital world.
Couldn't agree more.
And you know what? I think we've given our listeners plenty to chew on for today. But don't worry, we'll be back next week with another deep dive into the world of cybersecurity. Until then, stay safe out there.
And stay calm.
Always. But, we're not done with NordVPN's research just yet. They also found that there's been a pretty big increase in malware coming from those, video hosting sites.
Yeah, it seems even those cute cat videos could be hiding something dangerous.
Really? So you're telling me that my daily dose of internet fluff could actually be risky?
Well, not every video, of course. But attackers are getting creative, using malicious ads or even embedding malware right into the video files themselves.
So it's not just downloads we have to worry about anymore. We got to watch out for what we're streaming, too.
Exactly. The threats are always changing. We can't just assume that something is safe because it's on a mainstream platform.
To be honest, that's a little unnerving. Feels like there's always a new threat popping up. It can get kind of overwhelming.
I know what you mean. It's easy to feel like we're constantly playing catch-up. But remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand these threats, the better prepared we are to deal with them.
That's true. So, what's the best way to stay ahead of the curve? Besides listening to this podcast, of course.
Well, staying informed is key. Keep up with security news, even if it's just skimming the headlines. You'd be surprised how many attacks can be prevented just by being aware of what's out there.
So it's not just about having the latest antivirus. We need to be proactive about our own cybersecurity.
Exactly. It's kind of like staying healthy. It's not just about going to the doctor when you're sick. It's about making healthy choices every day.
Okay, so what are some of those healthy choices we can make to strengthen our digital immune systems?
Well, the first and most important thing is strong passwords and multi-factor authentication. Those are non-negotiable. They're like having bodyguards for your accounts, making it way harder for attackers to break in.
Okay, so strong passwords, two-factor, check. But what about those phishing scams? They always seem to slip through the cracks.
Always be suspicious of any emails you get out of the blue, especially if they ask for personal information or want you to click on a link. Remember, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
So if I get an email from a Nigerian prince offering me a fortune, I should just hit delete.
Probably a safe bet, yeah. And be cautious about downloading files from sources you don't know or trust. If you're unsure, scan it with your antivirus software before you open it.
Speaking of downloads, what about those software cracks and keygens you see floating around online? Are those ever a good idea?
I would definitely advise against using those. They're often riddled with malware. It's much safer to just buy your software from legitimate sources. It might cost a little more, but you're paying for peace of mind.
No shortcuts when it comes to software.
Got it. What about VPNs? Any advice on finding one that actually provides the privacy and security they promise?
Definitely. Remember those new VPN testing standards we talked about earlier? Those can be a great guide when you're choosing a VPN. Look for providers that have gone through independent testing and have a good track record.
So, do your homework. Don't just go for the cheapest option.
Right. And don't forget to keep your operating system and your software up to date. Those updates often include security patches that fix known vulnerabilities that attackers could try to exploit.
Like getting a booster shot for your computer. A little annoying at the time, but it could save you from a lot of pain later.
Perfect analogy. And last but not least, make sure you're backing up your data regularly. If you ever get hit with ransomware or have a hardware failure, a recent backup can be an absolute lifesaver.
It's like an insurance policy for your digital life.
Exactly. So many people overlook this, but it's one of the most important things you can do. Okay, so strong passwords, two-factor authentication, watch out for phishing, be careful about downloads, keep your software updated, and back up your data. Got it. Anything else?
Well, actually, there's one more thing I wanted to talk about. It's something that comes up a lot when we discuss cybersecurity.
Oh, I'm intrigued. What is it?
We spend a lot of time talking about how to protect ourselves from attacks. But have you ever wondered if there's a right way and a wrong way to test your own system's security?
You mean like trying to hack into your own stuff?
Exactly. It's called penetration testing, and it's a really important part of a good cybersecurity strategy. Basically, you're hiring someone to try and break into your system so you can find and fix any vulnerabilities before the bad guys do.
That sounds kind of risky, though. Couldn't you accidentally cause some serious damage?
That's where the ethics of penetration testing come in. There's a delicate balance between finding weaknesses and making sure you're not actually harming anything in the process.
So there are, rules of engagement for ethical hacking.
Absolutely. And in the next part of the show, we're going to dive into those rules. We'll talk about the legal and ethical aspects of penetration testing and how to make sure you're staying on the right side of the law while still being proactive about your security.
Sounds interesting. I'm looking forward to it. So before we wrap things up, let's dive into those rules of engagement for ethical hacking that we were talking about.
Right, penetration testing. It's a fascinating area, really, and a crucial one for any organization that's serious about security.
Yeah, it seems like a bit of a tightrope walk, though. How do we make sure we're staying on the right side of the law when we're doing these kinds of tests?
The most important thing is to have explicit permission from the owner of the system you're testing.
Okay, so it's like getting a warrant before you search someone's house.
Yeah.
You need that authorization to make sure everything is legal.
Exactly. And even with permission, there are still rules you have to follow. Like, you need to define the scope of the test very clearly. Yeah, the ethical hacker needs to know exactly what systems they're allowed to test, what methods they can use, and what their goals are.
So no going rogue and trying to hack into, like, the CIA just for fun.
Definitely not. And any vulnerabilities they find have to be reported to the system owner right away.
No exploiting them for personal gain or bragging rights.
Nope. Ethical hackers are there to help improve security, not to cause harm.
So it's all about finding the weaknesses, fixing the holes, and making the digital world a safer place.
Exactly. But the ethical considerations go beyond just the technical stuff. It's also about respecting people's privacy.
So even if you have permission to test a system, you can't just go poking around in people's personal files.
Right. Ethical hackers have to handle sensitive information very carefully and keep everything confidential.
It's like being a doctor. You have access to confidential medical records, but you're bound by a code of ethics to protect that information.
That's a great analogy. And just like in medicine, ethical hackers have to prioritize the well-being of others above everything else.
So using their powers for good, not for evil.
Exactly. And we've covered a lot of ground today, a lot of technical terms and complex ideas, but I think the main takeaway is that cybersecurity doesn't have to be overwhelming.
Right. We don't want people to feel like they need a computer science degree just to stay safe online.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's all about making smart choices and developing good habits.
It's like anything else in life. If you take care of yourself, you're less likely to get sick. And if you take care of your digital hygiene, you're less likely to fall victim to a cyber attack.
Well said.
So stay informed, be vigilant, and don't be afraid to ask questions if you're not sure about something. There are tons of resources available to help you navigate this ever-changing world.
And of course, Calm Coding is always here to help guide you through the chaos.
We'll be back next week with another deep dive into all things cybersecurity. Until then, stay safe out there.
And stay calm.
Oh.